They told everyone I was just the property manager, the help. They stole my money to fund my brother's wedding and banned me for being too much. So I waited. I waited until my brother stood in front of 200 of their wealthiest friends in my mansion bragging about his legacy. That's when I gave the pilot the signal to land. The phone call that shattered my life began with the soft beep of an international connection and ended with the silent, gaping void of betrayal. "I just landed, Aunt May," I said, the humid Atlanta air already clinging to my suit as I stood amidst the whirl of Hartsfield-Jackson. "I can't get a hold of Mom or Dad. What time is the rehearsal dinner tonight?" The silence on the other end was so profound I could hear the static hum of the transatlantic line, a white noise that seemed to swallow all the oxygen around me. "Keisha, baby." Her voice finally trembled, a fragile whisper against the airport's roar. "Who told you the wedding was tomorrow?" My blood turned to ice, crystallizing in my veins. "Mom told me. The date is the 24th. That's tomorrow." I heard a sharp, stifled sob. "Oh, Lord have mercy. Keisha, honey, the wedding was last Saturday." The world tilted on its axis. The cacophony of the terminal, the boarding announcements, the squeal of suitcase wheels, the chatter of reunions faded into a dull, underwater roar. I stood frozen, a statue of expensive cream wool and tailored lines, clutching a phone that felt like a live wire. In my other hand, I held a receipt for a $5,000 crystal vase, a wedding gift now grotesquely obsolete. They'd had the celebration without me. The realization was a physical blow, a sucker punch to the solar plexus that left me breathless. But it was the chilling arithmetic that followed, clicking into place with merciless logic that truly hollowed me out. Last week, my mother called me weeping in Dubai. The venue required an emergency deposit or they'd lose the date. Marcus would be devastated. Sarah loved it. "Please, Keisha, send $15,000 right now." I'd wired the money within 10 minutes. That was Tuesday. The wedding had been Saturday. My mother hadn't been securing a venue. She'd been funding a wedding feast for a party from which her own daughter was categorically banned. She had scammed me, her own child, to pay for the flowers, the catering, the champagne that would toast my brother's union in my deliberate, calculated absence. "Why?" I whispered into the phone, the words scraping my throat raw. Aunt May's voice broke. "It was Viola. She and Sarah decided. They said you don't fit the image, Keisha. Sarah's family, the Whitmans, they're very particular. Old money. Your mother said you're too aggressive, too independent. You'd come in with your sharp suits and your business talk and make Marcus look small. She said you would embarrass them." I looked down, catching my reflection in the airport's glass partition. A 32-year-old black woman in an impeccable suit, the founder and CEO of K Empire, a multi-million-dollar real estate development firm. I'd paid off my parents' mortgage. I funded Marcus's private school while I ate instant noodles. I was the embarrassment because I built an empire with my own hands instead of marrying into one. The grief I expected, the familiar ache of familial dismissal, didn't come. Instead, a cold, surgical clarity settled over me, freezing the hot hurt solid. "Where are they now?" I asked, my voice dropping to a temperature that could frost the Georgia humidity. "At your parents' house," May sniffled. "Opening the gifts. They leave for the honeymoon tomorrow." I hung up without saying goodbye. As I hailed a black car, a final, devastating piece of the puzzle snagged in my mind. Aunt May had said they'd held the wedding at the fancy estate by the lake, the one Marcus said he rented. Marcus, with his bad credit and no job, couldn't rent a luxury doghouse, let alone a lakefront estate. With numb fingers, I opened my email, pulling up the file from my assistant, dated. There it was, the warranty deed for a $5 million foreclosure on Lake Lanier, purchased 6 months ago through one of my anonymous LLCs. I'd bought it as a private retreat. I even gave my parents the keys once, letting them think I was just the property manager for a wealthy client. They hadn't just stolen my money and my invitation. They'd thrown their sham celebration in my house. They'd used my stolen cash to throw a party on my stolen property, all while telling the privileged Whitmans I was merely the help. The fury that ignited then was not a fire, but a neutron star, infinitely dense, impossibly cold. "Where to?" the driver asked. I gave him my parents' address. "I'm not going there to cry," I said to the silent tinted window. "I'm going to collect a refund." And if they thought $15,000 was a lot of money, they were about to learn the exorbitant cost of trespassing on a $5 million asset. The familiar sight of my childhood home, with its peeling shutters and overgrown hedges, should have evoked nostalgia. Now it just looked like the set of a cheap play. Through the living room window, I saw the cast in their roles. My mother, Viola, laughing with her head thrown back, a performance of joy. My father, Harold, clapping Marcus on the shoulder with staged pride. And Sarah, the blonde, ethereal centerpiece, admiring a silver toaster. The stage was set with torn wrapping paper and lies. I didn't knock. The door swung open and the laughter died, sucked out of the room like a vacuum. 4 faces turned to me, frozen in various stages of shock and guilt. "I came to give you my gift," I said calmly in the eerie silence, "since I missed the wedding." Marcus had the decency to look at the floor. "Keisha, we can explain." Aunt May already did. "You had the wedding last week. You used my money to pay for it." Harold puffed out his chest, the bluster of a man who knew he was wrong but would never admit it. "We did what we had to do. You're being selfish, always counting dimes." "I raised you to pay for everything," I countered, my gaze steady, "including a wedding I was banned from." Viola sighed, the dramatic, weary sound she'd used my entire life to dismiss my needs. "Keisha, be realistic. Look at you." Her hand fluttered at my suit. "You're a lot. Sarah's family, they're refined. They don't understand women like you." "Women like me?" "Loud, aggressive, independent," she spat as if describing a disease. "You would suck all the air out of the room. We needed to present a proper family image." A proper family image. My success was a stain on their narrative. Sarah glided forward then, linking her arm with Marcus, offering me a smile of pity so profound it was an insult. "Oh, Keisha, don't be dramatic. We were thinking of you. You're single, 32, all alone. Weddings can be so hard for women in your position. We wanted to spare you that pain. You would have stuck out. Honestly, you would have embarrassed yourself." I looked at her, at my parents nodding along to her poisonous charity, and felt the final piece of my old self detach and float away. They saw a pathetic spinster to be pitied, a bull in a china shop to be excluded. They had no idea they were insulting a dragon in its own den. "Thank you, Sarah," I smiled, a gesture that didn't touch my eyes. "That clarifies everything." I pulled out my phone. "Since we're discussing property, you should know something about that beautiful venue, the one Marcus rented." I turned the screen. The deed glowed, my LLC's name clear above the legal description. I own it. The silence was sweeter than any wedding champagne, but I wasn't finished. "We can discuss my assets later. Right now, I want my $15,000 back." What followed was a symphony of entitlement. Marcus scoffed, calling it a late gift. Harold revealed they'd drained their retirement to buy Marcus a Mercedes to impress the Whitmans. Viola shrieked that Marcus was their investment, their ticket to high society. "Get out!" Harold roared, pointing a trembling finger. "We don't need your negativity. We don't need you." I looked at them. The righteous father, the disdainful mother, the smirking golden child, the smug bride, and saw them for what they were. Strangers. "Fine," I said, turning to leave. "Keep the money. keep the lies. But that $15,000 is the last penny you will ever see from me. Don't call me when the car breaks down. Don't call me when the bills come due. I walked out, the door slamming shut on my childhood like a tomb ceiling. The war was declared. Back in the soaring silence of my Buckhead penthouse, I poured a scotch and let the truth wash over me. My family believed I was a glorified secretary living in a studio apartment. They had no idea about K-Empire, about the distressed assets I turned into gold, about the fortress of wealth I'd built to escape the poverty they'd forced me into while funding Marcus. I was 14 again, eating salty noodles while he wore a blazer with a crest. I'd learned then they would always burn my future to keep him warm. That's why I hid my success. To them, I was just a renewable resource. My phone buzzed. David, my attorney. Keisha. His voice was tense. Someone just tried to run a title search on the lake house, a hard moneylender. Someone's applying for a $200,000 loan against it with a forged deed. The audacity was breathtaking. Marcus wasn't just playing house, he was trying to mortgage it. A quick dive into Sarah's social media revealed the why. So excited for our official wedding reception next month at the Blackwell family estate. She'd promised her parents' elite friends a show at a mansion they believed her new husband owned. Marcus was cornered. He needed cash to fund the charade and access to the property to prove it. He was committing felony fraud to maintain a lie. I told David not to alert the authorities. Not yet. Let them in, I said, a plan crystallizing. Let them get comfortable. Let them sign contracts with caterers. Let them invite every important person they know. I want them to host that party, David, because when I pull the rug out, I want the audience to be the very people they're trying to impress. The trap was set. Predictably, my mother called, her voice dripping with syrupy false warmth, inviting me over for peach cobbler. I went, playing my part in their clumsy drama. Over dessert, Marcus finally stammered his request, the keys to the lake house for a quiet honeymoon. No, I said, the word flat and final. The facade crumbled. Viola slammed the table. That house belongs to this family. You bought it with the money you gave us. The mental gymnastics were Olympic. I gave you that money to pay off your mortgage. You gave it to Marcus for a crypto scheme that went to zero. The lake house is mine. It has nothing to do with you. Harold stood, red-faced. Hand over the keys or you're no daughter of mine. I stood, grabbing my purse. Then I guess I'm an orphan. Don't come to the lake house and tell your loan shark to find new collateral. They came anyway. My security feed showed my father and brother with a locksmith, drilling the gate of my estate in the dead of night. I watched, my finger hovering over the police alert, but arresting them now would let them play victim. I needed the fall to be from the highest possible height. With a few taps, I disarmed the silent alarm and remotely unlocked the gate. On screen, Marcus jumped back, then swelled with triumph, believing he'd conquered the castle. He had no idea he was walking into a cage. They moved in like an occupying force. Viola directed movers with my wine. Sarah posted a picture by my infinity pool, tagging me with a caption that made my blood cold. Thanks to my sister-in-law Keisha for acting as our property manager and getting the place scrubbed down. It's so nice when family knows their place. She'd labeled me, the owner, as the help. I watched they erase me. They took down my favorite painting, a swirling abstract of blues and golds, and hung a garish wedding portrait instead. My books were swept aside for bridal magazines. My Moroccan vase was declared tacky and relegated to the garage. They were colonizing my life, my taste, my sanctuary, and I compiled the evidence, frame by digital frame. David's financial deep dive revealed the true depth of the disaster. Marcus wasn't just a liar, he was a desperate gambler. $200,000 in debt to a man named Silas Vance, a lender who favored enforcers over late notices. The loan against my house was to pay off those debts. His plan was to use the Whitman reception to woo his new father-in-law for an investment, pay off Vance, and walk away clean. He was betting my house and his marriage on his ability to deceive a banking mogul. It was a house of cards built on my foundation. I decided to give it a nudge. I called Vance's office. Mr. Blackwell is hosting a large event at the property this weekend to showcase his success, I told a gruff voice. If you want to verify your collateral and his standing, that's the time to do it. He'll be on stage around 7. I just invited a wolf to the party. The day of the reception dawned bright and cruel. From the passenger seat of a helicopter, I watched the live feed on my tablet. The driveway was a parade of Bentleys and Rolls-Royces. My parents, in clothes bought with my stolen credit card, held court, bragging about writing checks for Marcus's vision. They were erasing me in real time, claiming my empire as their generational wealth. As the sun began to set, Marcus took the stage, beaming under the lights, ready to cement his lie. He tapped the microphone. "Welcome to our home," he boomed, the gracious lord of the manor. Then the low thump of rotor blades cut through his speech, growing to a deafening roar. The wind from the descent whipped tablecloths and sent floral arrangements flying. My black helicopter descended onto the south lawn, a dragon landing in the middle of the fairy tale. The doors slid open and I stepped out, my white suit a stark blade against the pastel party. David and Sheriff Miller flanked me as I marched through the parted, stunned crowd. Sarah screamed for security. 2 men moved toward me just as the sheriff stepped forward. "Stand down, unless you want to charge with assaulting a property owner." He handed Sarah a certified copy of the deed. "This estate belongs to Keisha Blackwell." The unraveling was swift and brutal. Sarah's face melted from fury to horrified comprehension. "You lied to me," she whispered to Marcus, the words carrying on the sudden silence. I took the microphone from Marcus's trembling hand. "Hello, everyone," I said, my voice echoing calmly. "I apologize for the entrance, but a correction was necessary." I gestured behind me. David projected the deed, 20 feet tall, then the wire transfer receipt for the $15,000, then Marcus's fraudulent loan application to Silas Vance. "This event," I announced, "is paid for with stolen funds, hosted by a man who committed felony fraud on property you are all currently trespassing upon." The crowd erupted in murmurs. Lawrence Whitman, Sarah's father, stood, his face marble cold. He walked to the stage and delivered the death knell to Marcus's dreams. "You are a fraud." Then I brought the final hammer down. "And for the lender he defrauded," I nodded to the third row. Silas Vance stood, buttoning his suit with terrifying slowness. He looked at Marcus. "Where is my money, boy?" The threat hung in the air, tangible and violent. Panic broke Marcus. He pointed a shaking finger at our mother. "It was her idea. She told me to do it. She said Keisha was soft." Viola shrieked denials, the perfect family tearing itself apart on stage. Sarah lunged at Marcus, scratching his face, screaming about her ruined reputation before her father's security dragged her away. "The marriage is over," Mr. Whitman declared. "Annulment. By morning." Sheriff Miller moved in, cuffing Marcus as he sobbed. Deputies led my shell-shocked parents away in sequins and handcuffs. I stood alone on the stage, watching the blue lights flash across the lake I owned, the ruins of their illusion smoldering around me. The aftermath was a quiet, satisfying devastation. Marcus, denied bail, faced a decade in prison. My parents, having co-signed his loans, lost their house to foreclosure and faded into a roach-infested motel, their social standing ash. Sarah's swift annulment and lawsuit ensured they'd never recover financially. They called me, of course. From a payphone, my mother screamed that I was a heartless demon, that I'd die alone. I listened, felt nothing, and blocked the number. I was an orphan by choice, and for the first time, I felt whole. I sold the lake house, the beautiful, haunted thing. The profit was staggering, but I didn't want a monument to their betrayal. Instead, I used the money to found the Keisha Blackwell Foundation, providing full scholarships and mentorship to young Black women whose families suffocated their ambitions. At the inaugural gala, I met Andre, an architect who admired my mind before my charity, who saw a partner, not a victim or a bank. He was the future I'd allowed myself to deserve. A year later, in a Parisian spring, a text found me. Keisha, it's Marcus. I'm washing dishes. Can you send $50 just for food? I'm your brother. I read it at a cafe overlooking the Seine, Andre beside me. The golden child begging for burger money. I typed a reply, my fingers steady. Try Uber. I hit send, stood up, and walked to the river's edge. I pulled my arm back and threw the phone, watching it arc and vanish into the dark, flowing water. It was petty. It was perfect. It was the period on the story. I turned back to Andre and took his hand. Let's go, I said. I hear the baguettes here are worth fighting for. We walked away, leaving the past to be carried out to sea, ready to build something true, something that belonged only to us. The journey taught me that family is a bond of loyalty, not DNA. For years, I tried to buy love from people who only saw a resource. The moment I stood in my own power was the moment I became free. True revenge isn't cruelty. It's a life lived fully, joyfully, and without them. You define your own worth. No one else gets a vote. The scent of freshly baked bread and rich coffee followed us down the cobbled street, a tangible promise of the new day. Andre's hand was warm and solid in mine, an anchor in the swirling current of my own liberation. The phantom vibration of that discarded phone was already fading, replaced by the real, vibrant pulse of Parisian life around us. We found a tiny boulangerie tucked into a corner, its windows steamy, the air inside thick with the aroma of butter and yeast. The simple act of choosing a perfect, crusty loaf felt like a sacrament, a deliberate embrace of a present unburdened by the ghosts of Georgia. Later, as we shared that bread and cheese on a bench in the Place de Vosges, Andre didn't ask about the phone or the text. He simply leaned back, tilting his face to the dappled sunlight filtering through the lime trees. You know, he said, his voice a low rumble of contentment, that restoration project in the Marais, the foreman found original parquet under 3 layers of linoleum. Herringbone. It's an incredible shape. He launched into the technical details of preservation, the challenges of modern insulation meeting 17th century beams. He spoke to me as his equal, his collaborator. The conversation was a clean, well-lit room after the claustrophobic drama of my family making. This was the language of building, not destruction. This was my language. Back in Atlanta, the echoes of the scandal finally quieted to a dull hum. My parents, Harold and Viola, became a cautionary tale mentioned in hushed tones at country club brunches before the conversation swiftly moved on to more palatable topics. I learned through the impersonal filter of legal updates that Marcus had taken a plea deal, 7 years with the possibility of parole in 5. The news landed with a soft thud, like a distant door closing. I felt no vindication, only a faint, sterile pity for the stranger he'd become. The foundation, however, was a roaring, living thing. My office was flooded with applications from brilliant young women with fire in their eyes and the weight of expectation on their shoulders. Girls who were told they were too much, too ambitious, too outspoken. We funded their tuition, their housing, connected them with mentors. We became the family they chose, the safety net that didn't come with strings of guilt or manipulation. It was at a fundraiser for the foundation, 6 months after Paris, that the past tried one last feeble reach. I was circulating through the crowd at the High Museum, thanking donors, when a familiar, hunched figure caught my eye near the Rodin sculpture. Harold. He looked decades older, his suit hanging loosely, the bluster utterly deflated. He was alone. Our eyes met across the room. There was no anger in his gaze, only a hollow, weary shame. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, then turned and shuffled toward the exit, disappearing into the night as quietly as he'd appeared. Viola, I heard through Aunt May, who was thriving in her new condo and had steadfastly honored my condition of no contact with her brother, had retreated into a bitter, small world of daytime television and grudges. The sight of my father, that broken ghost, was the final, quiet exorcism. There was no rage left to burn, only an acknowledgement that some bridges aren't burned, but simply eroded by time and toxic water until nothing remains to cross. With Andre, I built a different kind of home. We bought a modern, sun-drenched loft in a converted warehouse, not as a showpiece, but as a workshop for our lives. His architectural plans were spread next to my financial models on our large concrete table. We argued good-naturedly over zoning laws and paint swatches. We traveled not to escape, but to discover. Hiking in Patagonia, getting lost in the Medinas of Morocco, finding inspiration in Tokyo's neon-drenched alleyways. He never once asked about the lake house, or the helicopter, or the court case. He loved the woman I was now, the one forged in that fire, and had no morbid curiosity about the ashes. The foundation's work led me to a young woman named Tasha, a physics prodigy from rural Alabama, whose family told her dreaming of MIT was putting on airs. We brought her to Atlanta for an interview. She sat in my office, her knees pressed tightly together, hands clasped in her lap, but her eyes held a ferocious, unquenchable light. As I outlined the scholarship, the dorm room, the stipend, her composure broke. Not into tears of gratitude, but into tears of sheer, staggering relief. "You mean I can just study?" she whispered. "I won't have to work 3 jobs and send half of it home?" In that moment, I saw my own reflection, the ghost of that hungry girl with her instant noodles. But Tasha's story would have a different arc. That was the real profit, the only legacy that mattered. One evening, as Andre and I were reviewing plans for a new community center, a project that would combine his design genius with the foundation's outreach, my business phone buzzed. It was David. "Keisha," he said, his tone unreadable. "I have a proposal, a rather unusual one." He paused. "It's regarding the Lake Lanier property." I felt a faint chill, a ripple in my calm pond. "I sold it, David. It's gone." "I know. The tech CEO who bought it? His company just went under in a massive fraud scandal. The estate is back on the market, a distressed asset. The bank is desperate. They're offering it at 40% below your sale price." He let the numbers hang in the air. The ultimate distressed asset, circling back to me. The irony was a dark, polished stone. I looked out the window of our loft at the Atlanta skyline, my city, the empire I'd built from nothing. I thought of the infinity pool, the terraces, the ghost of a wedding portrait on the wall. Then I thought of Tasha and the 50 other young women whose lives were unfolding in laboratories, lecture halls, and startups because of a foundation that existed precisely because of that house's poisoned history. "No," I said, my voice firm. "I'm not interested in relics." But then an idea, crystalline and perfect, formed. "But David, put in a bid on my behalf. Low, absurdly low. If we get it, we're not keeping it, we're going to donate it to the State University's Environmental Science Program, a lakeside research and retreat center for disadvantaged students. Have the paperwork drawn up so that upon transfer, it will be renamed. Not after me." I took a deep breath, the words feeling like a final incantation. "The May Williams Center. For my aunt." There was a long silence on David's end, followed by a soft, genuine laugh. "Keisha Blackwell," he said, admiration clear in his voice, "turning a monument to family fraud into a monument to future grace. That might be your best deal yet." We did get the house. The paperwork was a quiet, beautiful justice. The deed was transferred, the plans for the research center drawn. The story made a small, positive splash in the news, a feel-good footnote to an old scandal. I never visited. I didn't need to. I had built my own sanctuaries. On the anniversary of the day I'd landed at Hartsfield-Jackson, a year after the Paris phone toss, I found myself in my office late. The city glittered below, a galaxy I'd learned to navigate on my own terms. A notification popped up on my screen, a financial update from the foundation. Tasha had just won a prestigious national research fellowship. Another scholar, Chloe, had launched her own sustainable clothing line. The numbers were good, but the stories were everything. My personal cell, the one only Andre and a handful of trusted people had, buzzed. It was a photo from Andre, who was on a site visit in Savannah, a close-up of beautiful, weathered brickwork. The caption, "Reminded me of you. Enduring, beautiful, solid. Home soon." I smiled, a real, easy smile that started deep within. I powered down my computer and walked to the window. The ghost of that frantic, heartbroken woman at the airport was just that, a ghost. She had been a necessary chrysalis. The woman who looked back at me now from the dark glass was someone else entirely. She was not defined by what had been taken from her, but by what she had chosen to build from the wreckage, the love she had chosen to accept, the future she had chosen to fund, the family she had chosen to create. The silence in the penthouse was no longer empty. It was full of a peace so profound it felt like a presence. I turned off the light, the skyline my nightlight, and went home, not to a house, but to a life that was finally, unquestionably, my own. The story wasn't about revenge anymore. It was simply about a woman who had finally come home to herself and found the world waiting there, wide open and gleaming. The proposal from the Dubai consortium arrived on Tuesday, printed on paper so thick it felt like vellum. It was for a joint venture, a mixed-use skyscraper that would redefine a slice of the Dubai marina skyline. The financials were staggering, the risk commensurate, the potential legacy. 2 years ago, I would have pored over it alone in this same office, my ambition a solitary, hungry flame. Now, I slid the proposal into my briefcase beside Andre's sketched ideas for the atrium's internal ecosystem, a vertical garden he insisted could be both breathtaking and carbon negative. We were flying to the UAE tomorrow, a partnership in every sense. The flight was long, but the hours passed in a companionable blur of shared headphones, whispered critiques of in-flight movies, and the quiet rustle of paper as we refined our pitch. As the Burj Khalifa pierced the horizon, a familiar silhouette of impossible ambition, I felt no intimidation, only a sense of scale. I had built my own towers, in my own way. The meeting was held in a cool, silent boardroom high above the glittering Persian Gulf. The consortium members, a collection of sharp-eyed Emirati and international investors, were polite, precise, and formidable. I presented the financial architecture, the market analysis, the exit strategies. Andre followed, not with dry blueprints, but with a narrative of space and light, of how a building could breathe and give back to the city that hosted it. He spoke of using local, ancient cooling techniques married to cutting-edge solar glass. We were a perfect duet, the unassailable logic and the irresistible vision. During the Q&A, the eldest member of the consortium, a man named Al-Mansouri, with eyes the color of worn amber, steepled his fingers. "Miss Blackwell," he began, his English elegant and measured, "your reputation for turning distressed assets into gold is impressive, but this," he gestured to the model, "is not a foreclosure. This is a birth. Why do you wish to build something new, here, with us?" It was the question I hadn't realized I'd been waiting for. I set down my water glass. "Mr. El-Mansouri, a distressed asset isn't always a property. Sometimes it's a narrative. For a long time, the narrative of my own life was one of scarcity, of affection, of validation, of worth. I became adept at finding value where others saw only ruin. Now," I glanced at Andre, who gave an almost imperceptible nod, "I am interested in a different kind of value, not just in reclaiming what is broken, but in collaborating to create something that has never existed before. This project represents that shift. It's not about turning lead into gold, it's about assembling entirely new elements." A slow smile spread across Al-Mansouri's face. He nodded, once. The meeting continued, but the atmosphere had shifted. We had passed a test I hadn't known was being administered. Later, as we celebrated with a quiet dinner overlooking the dizzying city lights, Andre squeezed my hand. "You know," he said, "when you said new elements, I thought he was going to ask for a chemistry lesson. But you got it. You spoke their language, the language of legacy." The deal was secured, a thrilling, terrifying partnership that would consume us for years. But the true marker of that trip came on our last night. We escaped the air-conditioned towers and walked through the bustling, fragrant lanes of the Al Fahidi Historical District. Amidst the muted sandstone and the whisper of history, my phone vibrated. It was an email notification from the Georgia Department of Corrections. Marcus had been approved for a parole hearing. There was a link for victim impact statements. The warm night air suddenly felt thick. Andre, sensing the change, guided me to a quiet courtyard where a single date palm rustled overhead. "What is it?" he asked, his voice low. I showed him the screen. He didn't offer platitudes or advice. He simply waited, a steady presence in the shadows. I thought of Marcus, not as the villain of my story, but as the scared boy who'd also been poisoned by our parents' warped alchemy, who'd chosen the easy path of deception and was now paying for it in years and regret. I thought of the $50 text, the ultimate reduction of a human being to a desperate transactional plea. A victim impact statement would require me to define myself once again in relation to his crime, to re-enter that narrative of damage. I opened the link on my phone. The form was stark, bureaucratic. Describe the physical, financial, and emotional impact of the crime. I stared at the blinking cursor. Then I began to type. Not about the stolen money, the violated home, the public humiliation. I wrote about the 14-year-old girl who learned her love had a price and her presence was an inconvenience. I wrote about the professional woman who had to build a fortress of anonymity to protect her success from her own blood. I wrote about the cost of a lifetime of vigilance, the emotional interest on a debt of neglect that had compounded for decades. I was honest, brutal, and clear. But in the final section, the one asking for a parole recommendation, I paused. The desert wind whispered through the courtyard, carrying the distant call to prayer. I thought of Tasha in her MIT lab, of Aunt May in her condo, of Andre's hand in mine. I thought of the unbuilt skyscraper waiting for us back in the boardroom. My life was so full, so vast, that the shadow Marcus cast was finally, truly small. I typed my final sentence. I have no recommendation for the board. My impact has been processed and my recovery is my own. I am neutral to his release, as I am now neutral to the past he represents. I hit submit before I could second-guess it. The email whooshed away into the digital ether. I felt a final, clean severance, as if I had just notarized my own freedom. "Done?" Andre asked softly. I looked up, meeting his gaze. "Done," I confirmed, and it was true in every sense. We walked back to our hotel, the sounds of old Dubai and new Dubai weaving around us, and I felt lighter than I had in years. The past was no longer a chain. It was simply a country I had once visited whose borders I had no desire to cross again. The following years were a whirlwind of steel and glass and growth. The Dubai project, named Nexus, rose from the ground, a testament to our partnership. The Kesha Blackwell Foundation expanded, launching a venture capital wing specifically for businesses founded by our alumni. We were creating an ecosystem, a self-sustaining galaxy of talent and opportunity. Aunt May, our proud honorary chairperson, thrived in her role, her gentle wisdom a perfect counterbalance to my relentless drive. One crisp autumn day, I was back in Atlanta giving a keynote address at a Women in Leadership conference. The auditorium was packed, a sea of expectant faces. I spoke not of revenge, but of resource allocation, of how we must ruthlessly audit the emotional and financial investments that no longer yield a return, be they in toxic partnerships, stifling jobs, or draining family dynamics. I spoke about building your own board of directors, composed of people who believed in your vision without demanding a controlling share of your soul. The speech was a hit, a hard-nosed strategy and profound self-help that resonated deeply. Afterwards, as I signed books, a woman lingered at the edge of the line. She was elegant, in her late 50s, with an air of quiet melancholy that seemed etched into her fine features. When she finally reached me, she placed a book on the table but didn't open it for a signature. "Ms. Blackwell," she said, her voice husky, "I knew I had to come. I'm Eleanor Whitman." The name landed with a soft, shocking weight. Sarah's mother. I kept my expression professionally neutral. "Mrs. Whitman, thank you for coming." She shook her head, a quick, pained movement. "Please, I'm not here for pleasantries. What my daughter did, what we allowed in our blindness—" She took a shaky breath. "I've followed your work with the foundation. What you've built from all that." I wanted to look you in the eye and say, I am so very sorry. Not for Sarah, she must make her own amends, but for my part in valuing the wrong things. We were so obsessed with pedigree, with appearance, that we failed to see the authentic strength in front of us. We welcomed a forgery and exiled the real thing. Her eyes glittered with unshed tears, not of manipulation, but of genuine, hard-won remorse. I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed you to know that your success, your grace, it has been a lesson to me. A late one, but a profound one. The noise of the signing line faded. This was an ending I had never scripted, an apology from a quarter I'd never expected. I saw not the haughty society matron from the lake house lawn, but another woman who had been trapped in a narrative of class, of expectation, and had only recently broken free. "Thank you, Eleanor," I said, using her first name deliberately. "That means a great deal." I signed her book not with just my name, but with the inscription, "For New Beginnings." She took the book, clutched it to her chest, gave a small, grateful nod, and melted back into the crowd. It was a closure of a different, gentler kind. The universe, it seemed, was in the business of balancing ledgers in its own mysterious ways. That night, as I recounted the strange encounter to Andre over a glass of wine in our loft, he listened thoughtfully. "You know," he said after a moment, "for a long time your story was about demolition. Then it was about construction. Now," he smiled, topping up my glass, "I think it's about landscape architecture. You're not just building structures, you're changing the terrain for everyone around you, even the ones who used to own the land." His words settled in me, feeling true. The sharp edges of my past had been weathered, not into nothingness, but into something useful, like stones forming a new path. The following spring, Andre and I were married. It was a small ceremony at the Foundation's newest community center, which was still smelling of fresh paint and hope. Aunt May was my matron of honor. Tasha, now a graduate researcher, gave a reading. There was no family aisle to walk down. I walked toward Andre, and my chosen family flanked me on all sides. It was perfect. As we danced under strings of lights, Andre whispered in my ear, "So, what's the next distressed asset we're going to transform?" I laughed, resting my head on his shoulder, watching our friends and colleagues mingle on the dance floor, a tapestry of connections born from resilience, not blood. "I think," I murmured, "we're done with distressed assets. Let's just focus on prime real estate from now on." He held me closer, understanding the metaphor. The past was finally, fully behind us. We were no longer in the business of reclamation. We were in the business of creation, and the blueprint, for the first time, was entirely our own. The story didn't need to continue because it had finally become simply a life. Rich, complex, beautifully ordinary in its extraordinary peace, and utterly, completely mine. The storm that shut down Atlanta was the kind of meteorological event that made the news for a week. A freak combination of a stalled front and tropical moisture had dumped 13 inches of rain in 48 hours, turning streets into rivers and buckling the aging power grid. In our loft, the steady hum of the city was replaced by the percussive roar of water on glass and the eerie, cathedral-like silence of a blackout. We had candles, a gas stove, and a sense of adventure that lasted until the second day, when the food supplies grew thin and the news from our battery-powered radio spoke of widespread flooding in the very neighborhoods where our Foundation's scholars lived. Andre was on the satellite phone with the city's emergency management director, a college friend, leveraging his architectural knowledge of the sewer system. I was scrolling through a patchy signal on my phone, watching the Foundation's emergency group chat scroll with frantic updates. Tasha's basement apartment is flooding. Chloe's studio lost power to all her sewing machines. The community center roof is leaking in the new computer lab. Then, a different message appeared, from a number not in my contacts, but whose area code I knew too well. It was from the town where the state penitentiary was located, about an hour west. Miss Blackwell, parole hearing postponed due to flooding. Inmate Marcus was part of the sandbagging crew at the river levee. He's being treated for exposure at the infirmary. Stable. Warden thought you should know. I stared at the words, the candlelight throwing jagged shadows across the screen. Marcus, sandbagging. Not a groom in a stolen tuxedo, not a defendant in shackles, but a body fighting a literal flood. A strange, detached image formed in my mind. My brother, anonymous in prison denim, heaving sacks of sand against a rising, indifferent force. It was the most useful thing I could imagine him doing. "What is it?" Andre asked, hanging up the phone. The worry in his eyes was for me, always for me. I showed him the text. He read it, his face impassive. "Exposure is serious," he said finally, a practical assessment. "But stable is good." He waited, reading my silence. "Do you want to do anything?" Didn't I? The old scripts were useless. Sending money was irrelevant and insulting. Sending well wishes was hollow. Acknowledgement felt like reopening a door I'd welded shut. Yet the image persisted, the useful body, the communal fight against the flood. It was a narrative utterly divorced from our shared history. "No," I said, the decision solidifying as I spoke. "But have David contact the warden, see if the prison's infrastructure sustained damage in the flood. If they need help with repairs, electrical, plumbing, the foundation can facilitate a grant, a no-strings donation to the facility's infrastructure fund." It was, in its own way, turning a personal ghost into a public good. The only way I could say mercy without being dishonest. Andre's slow smile was a deep understanding. "Landscape architecture," he repeated softly. The floodwaters receded, leaving a city scarred and muddy, but pulsating with a gritty solidarity. Our foundation shifted into high gear, distributing supplies, offering emergency grants, providing temporary workspace. In the midst of the organized chaos, a package arrived at the foundation's office. It was a plain, sturdy cardboard box postmarked from the penitentiary town. Inside, nestled in bubble wrap, was my Moroccan vase, the one that Viola deemed tacky and banished to the garage of the lake house. It was unbroken. There was no note. David, who had handled the logistics of emptying the lake house before its donation to the university, confirmed it. When we cleared the garage for the university, that was in a crate. I must have missed it in the final inventory. The prison's work release program has a contract with a shipping company. He must have... David trailed off, as bewildered as I was.
I lifted the vase from its packing. The cobalt blue and emerald green glaze was just as I remembered, the shape cool and familiar in my hands. It wasn't an apology, it wasn't a plea, it was a repatriation. A single, tangible piece of my life, stolen and then returned through a bureaucratic back channel. He had seen it in that garage, recognized it as mine, and somehow, against all odds, gotten it back to me. It was the most coherent statement he'd ever made. I placed the vase on a shelf in our loft, in a spot of afternoon sun. It didn't look tacky. It looked beautiful. It looked like an artifact from a shipwreck, salvaged from deep water, its story made more interesting by the journey. The Dubai Nexus Tower was nearing its topping out ceremony, a sleek needle of glass and ambition. The final review before the last major construction phase was a video conference linking Atlanta, Dubai, and London. As we reviewed stress test data and wind tunnel simulations, a secondary alert popped up on my monitor, a financial news ticker. Whitman Family Bank announces acquisition by larger European conglomerate, Lawrence Whitman to step down as chairman. I felt a flicker of that old, cold satisfaction, but it was faint, like a distant echo. The empire that had once been the ultimate prize, the gilded cage Marcus had tried to buy into with my deeds, was itself being absorbed. The world moved on, consuming its own. The meeting ended with handshakes and smiles pixelated across oceans. My world was here, in these numbers, in this building yet to be, in the vase on the sunlit shelf. A few weeks later, I was walking through the newly renovated community center, now dry and buzzing with activity after the flood. In the bright computer lab, I saw a young girl, maybe 10, her brow furrowed in concentration as she guided a 3D printer nozzle. A foundation volunteer, one of our earlier scholarship recipients, knelt beside her, pointing at the screen. "See, you told it the wrong shape. It's doing exactly what you asked. The problem isn't the machine, it's the code. Always check the code first." The girl nodded, her frustration turning into focus. She went back to the keyboard, her small fingers tapping with renewed purpose. I stood watching, unseen. Always check the code first. The simple, profound wisdom of it washed over me. My entire life had been a process of debugging a toxic initial script, the code of conditional love, of gendered expectation, of sacrificial scarcity. I had rewritten it, line by painful line, into something that could build, that could sustain, that could nurture. On the drive home, I took a detour. I hadn't been near my old neighborhood in years. I didn't stop, just slowed the car as I passed the modest brick house. It was different. New owners had painted the shutters a cheerful blue, trimmed the hedges, planted hydrangeas by the porch. A child's bicycle lay tipped over on the walkway. It was no longer a monument to my past. It was simply someone else's present. A home. That night, as Andre and I sat on our balcony, the city lights shimmering like a scattered galaxy below us, I felt a completeness so profound it was almost a sound, a low, sustaining hum. The story wasn't about chapters anymore, the betrayal, the revenge, the rebuilding, the grace. Those were all in the rear view, their shapes growing smaller and less distinct with each mile traveled. Now it was about the road itself, stretching out into the gathering dusk, smooth and open. It was about the hand resting on mine, warm and certain. It was about the quiet knowledge that the code was finally clean, the foundation was solid, and the only thing left to build was a future, day by ordinary, extraordinary day. The past had run out of words. The present was a wide, welcoming silence, and I was finally, exquisitely, content to live inside it. The invitation to the unveiling of the May Williams Center for Environmental and Community Resilience arrived on thick, recycled paper, embossed with the university's seal and a subtle, elegant line drawing of the lake house's new purpose-built addition. The irony was not lost on me. The place they'd tried to steal for a lie was now being dedicated to truth-seeking and community service, named for the one family member who'd shown a flicker of courage. I sent my RSVP, a polite decline, with a generous donation attached. Some ghosts are best honored from a distance. Instead, Andre and I took that weekend and flew to Iceland. We hiked across a moss-covered lava field, the ground springy and alien under our boots, the silence broken only by the wind and the distant cry of Arctic terns. We were chasing the aurora, a phenomenon of light born from solar storms. As we stood shivering on a ridge that first night, the sky remained stubbornly dark, a velvet blanket pricked with cold stars. "Distressed asset," Andre joked, zipping my coat higher under my chin. Even nature doesn't always perform on demand. The second night, we got lucky. It began as a faint greenish smudge on the horizon, a breath of celestial color. Then it intensified, morphing into great undulating curtains of emerald and violet that pulsed and swayed across the entire dome of the sky. It was silent, majestic, and utterly indifferent to us. We were specks on a rock, witnessing a cosmic conversation between the sun and the Earth's magnetic field. I felt my own history, the scheming, the lawsuits, the helicopters, the vases, shrink to a microscopic scale. My heart didn't race with triumph or ache with old pain. It simply beat in time with the vast, quiet awe of the moment. Andre's arm was around me, his cheek against my temple. We didn't speak. We just were. This, I realized, was the ultimate luxury. Not a penthouse or a private jet, but the spaciousness to experience pure, uncomplicated wonder. A week after we returned, buzzing with the clarity of cold air and big skies, David called. His tone was different, not the crisp legalese of business, but the subdued register of someone delivering odd, personal news. "Keisha," he said, "Marcus was released, early, for good behavior and the flood work. He's out." I was in my home office, looking at a schematic for a rainwater harvesting system for the new community center. The news landed like a small stone dropped into a deep, still pond. A ripple, then calm. "I see," I said. "There's more," David continued. "He didn't go to your parents. They're not in a position to take him. He used his discharge grant to enroll in a trade program, a 9-month certification for commercial truck driving. He's in a halfway house near the training facility." David paused. "He listed the foundation's main office as a point of contact. Not for anything, just contact." I leaned back in my chair, looking not at the schematic, but at the Moroccan vase on the windowsill. The sun caught its glaze, making the blues and greens glow like a captured piece of the ocean. A truck driver. It was honest work. Necessary. It required reliability, adherence to rules, a tolerance for solitude. It was, in its way, the perfect fit. And listing the foundation as a contact, it wasn't a request for help. It was a message in a bottle.
"I don't need to be a point of contact, David," I said, my voice even, "but ensure the Foundation's internship coordinator knows about the program he's in. If they ever need a logistics partner for moving supplies for disaster relief or community projects, that company would get a fair look. Not a guarantee, a fair look." David understood. It was the final, elegant severance. I was not offering a hand, but leveling the ground. The rest would be up to him, his record, his work ethic. The past would not be a shackle, nor would it be a golden ticket. It would be irrelevant. Spring in Atlanta is a riot of color, a defiant explosion of azaleas and dogwoods after the gray winter. The Foundation was hosting its annual Founders Day, not to celebrate me, but to showcase the work of the scholars and alumni. It was a bustling, joyful carnival of science fair projects, art installations, and startup pitches spread across the community center park. Tasha was demonstrating a scale model of a low-cost water filtration system. Chloe had a pop-up shop of upcycled clothing. The air hummed with ambition and the smell of food truck fare. I was moving through the crowd, feeling a profound, quiet happiness, when I saw a figure standing at the edge of the green, near the gated parking lot. He was leaner, his posture straighter than I remembered, dressed in clean, simple jeans and a work shirt. Marcus. He wasn't trying to approach, he was just watching. His gaze was fixed on the scene, the vibrant, striving energy of the world I had built. There was no envy on his face, no calculation, just observation, and perhaps a flicker of something that might have been a distant, respectful understanding. Our eyes met across 50 yards of laughing children and buzzing conversation. He didn't smile, he didn't wave, he simply gave a single, slow nod. It was the same nod my broken father had given me in the museum, but this one carried a different weight. Not shame, but acknowledgement, a recognition of a border respected. Then he turned, climbed into the cab of a plain white van with the logo of a freight company on the side, and drove away. He'd gotten his license. I stood there for a long moment, the sun warm on my skin. A young scholar, a brilliant young man from the projects who was now pre-med, bounded up to me, his face alight. "Miss Blackwell, you have to see the neural interface my team is prototyping. It's crude, but the principles are sound." He tugged at my sleeve, his enthusiasm a tangible force. I let him lead me away, back into the heart of the world I inhabited. The ghost was gone, not with a bang or a whimper, but with the quiet rumble of a well-tuned engine heading down the road. The story of Keisha and Marcus was, at last, definitively over. What remained was simply my life. This sunlit park, this eager young mind, the work that mattered, the love that waited for me at home. Later, as Andre and I cleaned up, stacking chairs and gathering discarded name tags, he brushed a smudge of grass from my cheek. "Long day," he said. "Good day," I corrected. He smiled. "What's next, then?" I looked around at the emptying park, at the community center that stood as a fortress of hope, at the city skyline beginning to sparkle in the twilight. I thought of the silent aurora and the nodding ghost. The narrative was complete. There were no more dragons to slay, no more ruins to rebuild. There was simply the quiet, glorious, and ongoing project of living well. I laced my fingers through his, the familiar weight of his hand the surest thing I knew. "Next," I said, leaning into him, "let's go home. I hear the forecast is clear." And it was.